The world knows him as the tribal chief. The man who sat at the head of the table for over 1,000 days, who made grown wrestlers bow before he even threw a punch. But long before he was acknowledged, Roman Reigns was fighting a war that had nothing to do with a wrestling ring, a war against his own blood. Behind every title he lifted, there was a secret he carried in silence for over a decade. What if the strongest man in WWE history was, in reality, its most fragile? If Roman Reigns' story means something to you, hit that like button right now, because what you're about to hear, he never wanted the world to see. Lady Joseph Anoa'i was born on May 25, 1985, into a family that didn't just wrestle, it built dynasties. His father, Sika, was one half of the legendary Wild Samoans tag team. His cousins would go on to become The Rock, Yokozuna, Rikishi, the Usos. In most households, that kind of lineage would feel like a golden ticket. For young Joe, it felt like a shadow he had to grow into. He didn't grow up wrestling. He grew up playing football on the same red Georgia clay that shaped his frame into something built for collision. Football, not wrestling, was supposed to be his path out. There's a quieter story behind that decision. One about a father who had already given everything to a business that chewed up men's bodies and spat them out with nothing to show for it. Sika didn't push his son toward the ring. If anything, he pushed him away from it, hoping football would spare Joe the toll wrestling had taken on him. Isn't it strange how the thing our parents try hardest to protect us from often becomes the very thing we're pulled toward? Joe Anoa'i earned a scholarship to Georgia Tech, became an all-ACC defensive lineman, and briefly chased an NFL dream with the Minnesota Vikings and later the Jacksonville Jaguars. Behind the scenes, it was his mother, Patricia, and his father's quiet insistence on discipline that kept him grounded through it all. The small, unglamorous sacrifices of two parents raising a son who didn't yet know what he was truly meant to survive. Football didn't work out, but something else was already stirring, invisibly, inside his own body. A diagnosis that wouldn't be spoken aloud publicly for another decade. When his NFL dream ended, Joe turned to the family business he once tried to avoid. In 2010, he signed with WWE and was sent to Florida Championship Wrestling, training under Dusty Rhodes and Steve Keirn. The instinctive, chaotic joy of backyard roughhousing with cousins was replaced by something colder. Repetition, discipline, film study, learning to fall correctly thousands of times before anyone would trust him to stand tall in front of a crowd. The freedom of raw athleticism had to be traded for structure, for a version of himself built brick by brick under other men's instruction. By 2012, he debuted on WWE's main roster as part of The Shield, alongside Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose, three men in black tactical vests who stormed through crowds like a verdict nobody could appeal. It was the first time preparation met pressure on the world's biggest stage. The instinctive kid from Georgia Tech was gone. In his place stood a machine the audience hadn't yet decided whether to love. Music. What followed was a decade defined by improbable heights and impossibly loud doubt. In 2015, he won his first WWE World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 31, but the cheers he expected never fully arrived. Fans wanted someone else in that spot, and Reigns spent years absorbing boos meant for a story he didn't write. In 2017, he ended The Undertaker's WrestleMania undefeated streak at WrestleMania 33, a torch-passing moment that should have silenced the doubters. It didn't. Then, in the summer of 2018, he defeated Brock Lesnar for the Universal Championship at SummerSlam. On paper, it looked like his coronation. In reality, it was the calm before the hardest storm of his life. On October 22, 2018, Roman Reigns walked into the ring not as a character, but as himself. He told the world he had been diagnosed with leukemia 11 years earlier, quietly, privately, while still a young athlete chasing an NFL career, and that it had now returned. In front of a stunned arena, he relinquished the title he had just won weeks before. Picture that contrast for a moment. A man crowned champion of the biggest wrestling company on earth, forced within weeks to hand that crown back, not because he lost a match, but because he was fighting for his life. The cheers of SummerSlam and the silence of that October night belong to the same short chapter of his story. He stepped away from WWE for months, out of the spotlight, undergoing treatment far from the cameras that once followed his every move. In February 2019, he returned to Raw and told the crowd his leukemia was in remission. The people who had booed him for years stood and chanted his name instead. Sometimes the applause someone has waited a lifetime for only arrives after they've stopped performing for it. The Roman Reigns who came back was not the same man who left. When the COVID-19 pandemic arrived in 2020, he made the difficult call to step away from a scheduled WrestleMania match against Bill Goldberg, choosing his immunocompromised health and his growing family over a spotlight moment. It would have been easy to chase the applause. Instead, he chose caution, humility, and his children over the show. That is a different kind of strength than the one fans cheer for in the ring. When he returned again in August 2020, he did so as a transformed character, the tribal chief, calm, calculated, surrounded by family rather than isolated by rivalry. In April 2022, at WrestleMania 38, he defeated Brock Lesnar in a winner-takes-all match to unify the WWE and Universal Championships, beginning a reign that would stretch past 1,300 days. But even that record-breaking dominance wasn't a solo achievement. It was built alongside his real-life cousins, the Usos, and the extended Anoa'i wrestling family who had shaped him since childhood. The same bloodline his father once tried to shield him from now standing directly behind him at the head of the table. His championship reign finally ended at WrestleMania 40 in 2024, when Cody Rhodes defeated him to complete his own long-awaited story. For a man who had spent years chasing the crowd's approval, losing the title didn't erase what he had built. If anything, it proved something quieter and more permanent. His value was never only in the title, but in surviving long enough, and honestly enough, to hand it off on his own terms. Today, Roman Reigns is a father to 6 children with his wife, Galina Becker, whom he met as a college athlete at Georgia Tech and married in a traditional Samoan ceremony in 2014. He has spoken openly about still taking medication to manage his leukemia, describing it candidly in interviews as a lifelong condition he simply lives alongside now rather than a battle with a clean finish line. He remains active in WWE, competing for championships in 2026 against opponents like Seth Rollins, even as the sports spotlight increasingly shifts toward the next generation of his own family. Maybe that's the real ending to this story. Not a man who conquered a disease and rode off into a perfect sunset, but a man who kept showing up, to the ring, to his children, to a body that fights him quietly every single day, without ever needing the world to notice the cost. Greatness, in the end, was never about the titles stacked on his shoulder. It was about the mornings he chose to get up anyway. So here's a question worth sitting with. Was Roman Reigns ever really the villain the crowd made him out to be for all those years? Or was he simply the one person in the room who understood what it actually meant to survive? If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. What's your favorite Roman Reigns memory, and what did you feel the first time you found out what he was really carrying all along?